fairly underused. And I have to say that I've been guilty of underusing this from time to time. I would say that when my father was still with us, that he was very good at using this. And so take the words of wisdom from someone that did it for like 5 decades, right? Hey guys, this is Coach Keith Kapner. With this video, I'm going to talk about all the details and nuances of your training equipment. So the basic training equipment, but I'm going to talk about all the details and high level stuff with that. If you watch this entire video, I promise you, there'll be probably one nuance at least that you'll pick up from this. You're like, dang, I want to put that in my training. Or maybe you'll pick up a lot of things. The newer you are to boxing, the more things obviously you'll probably pick up. By the way, so you know, the information that I'm putting out to you guys is not just stuff that I learned on YouTube, or no insult to people that gain information from YouTube, because I mean I've learned a lot of things like that. But with all this boxing stuff, as far as concerned, I'm teaching what I've implemented as a coach for over a decade, and what I implemented when I boxed in the United States, and also I got an opportunity to box in Mexico for a little bit of time, and as well as what it was taught to me by my mentor as a coach and as a fighter, my father, Doc Kepner, who worked with multitude of amateur champions, professional fighters, everything else, and did that for decades. And he was trained under the great Chuck Bodak, who worked with over 50 world champions, and he was the Olympic boxing coach for who would go on to be Muhammad Ali. All right, so without further ado, let's jump into it, all the details and things like that. Now, first off, let's talk about hand wraps. Important stuff. The wrapping of the hands. Now, to be clear, because people ask me all types of questions, right? You can get away without hand wraps for a period of time. I've done it. It's really largely to prevent overuse injuries, but it doesn't mean it's not absolutely important. But you can get away with a day of not wearing hand wraps. You know, you're hitting the bag, things like that, whatever. Now, maybe not with sparring. Why is that? Not because I'm talking about my concern of you hurting the other person, but again, I'm talking about you. I'm talking about your concern for yourself. Because again, to be clear, boxing is a very selfish sport. As a boxing coach, we need to be selfless, but as a fighter, you need to be pretty selfish. As a great athlete of any type, you need to be selfish. Now, why do I say you probably need to wear hand wraps when you spar? Because when you spar, you're probably going to hit some of the hardest stuff you ever hit. What do I mean? I'm not talking about hitting the body. I'm not talking about even hitting someone's like face and nose and jaw. I'm talking about when you accidentally hit their forehead, or when you punch an elbow. That's going to hurt a lot. And it can cause a lot of problem. Particularly, by the way, as well, not only with the knuckle, but also with the thumb. I see a lot of guys, they'll get away with not wrapping the thumb for a long period of time because you're not going to jack up your thumb hitting the mitts often, or definitely not really hitting the bag if you do it at all proper and you're not crazy about throwing some weird, goofy, loopy, crazy, wild, funky shots. All right? But you spar, you catch something the wrong way, somebody spikes your shot, and you get the you get the thumb joint jammed, and it can be something that puts you out for a long time. No good, no fun with that. All right, so let's talk about first though with hand wraps with the length of the wrap. All right, 180 to 200 inch wraps. I've maybe only used 200 inch for maybe once or twice, but 180 standard as a reasonable length of a wrap that you can actually do something with. Anything less, throw it in the garbage. The 120s, I don't care if you're small. I don't care how small you are. Throw in the garbage. 108s, throw in the garbage. It's useless. Unless you're like a 6-year-old child. Maybe if you're a 6-year-old child, the 120s. But other than that, stick to the 180, 200s. Because you need enough that you can build up some pad on your knuckles and put some security on that wrist and on that thumb. All right, you're not going to do that with the 108s. All right, complete waste of time. Now, let's talk about slip-ons. So slip-on wraps, where it's like a glove and you put it on, kind of looks like an MMA glove. Now, what's the good and what's the bad of these? There's a good to them. The good is, it's an easy way to get some knuckle protection. And that is the primary place you're going to have trouble with boxing training in general, is the knuckles, right? The number one place you're going to have problems. Now, it doesn't take care of number 2 and number 3. So number 2, a very close number 2 is wrist. And a far 3, like I said, for certain situations like when you spar and things like that, is the thumb. The slip-on wraps don't necessarily help that. I know they have the hybrid ones now where you can kind of do both, right? Where it's a slip-on, and then you can also, it has a wrap portion to it. So I haven't personally used that. If that works well for you, awesome. And of course, you could always hybrid all this together. You could get a like basic slip-on gel wrap thing, pre-wrap, I think is what some people call it, and then put a wrap over it. That might be a use you have for a 108, right? Just put it over it, or even a 120 or a 180. As long as you do it right, you'll be able to fit in the glove. Remember, the snugger fit you have in that glove, the better for you, right? It's going to move less. It's also going to be harder because there's a reason why when you do pro boxing or even amateur boxing, but you're limited on how much wrap you can use. But in pro boxing, you're not really that limited on how much wrap you can use. So it's however much you can stuff inside that glove within certain parameters. And the more you can stuff inside that glove, then it's going to be harder, right? If I stuff a bag full of stuff, like chock full, the more I stuff it and I were to whack you with it, the more it's going to have pop on you in power, versus if I have it just full of a couple items, right? It's going to move around a little bit more. Now, unless those couple items are like rocks or plaster of Paris, like some people have done, disgusting, horrible people in the sport of boxing. And you know who those people are if you follow the history at all, or even the recent history of the past 15 years, 20 years. All right. So those are slip-ons. Now the downside, like I said, they don't protect the wrist and the thumb. They protect the knuckle. So there's a downside to it. I recommend just suck it up, learn how to wrap, and there's better ways to do it. All right. Now let's talk about methods. All right. I'm not going to make this a hand wrap video and how you wrap your hands, but let me just talk about some broad concepts, because there's many ways to do something, right? But what's important is we're checking off certain boxes. The number one box you need to check off when you're wrapping your hands for training or for an amateur fight, because now they allow in America the regular cotton style wraps, training wraps for fighting. And that's fine too. Use the 180s. Now, you want to make sure that you maximize the amount of padding you have on your knuckles. You don't want to just wrap around your hand and just go around, and say, hey, it's wrapped, like you're wrapping up some produce. Because you need to have more, ideally as much as you can on the knuckle and as little as you can on the palm or under the knuckle inside the hand. So therefore you can close the fist all the way. The more you have equal on both, the harder it's going to be to make a tight fist. So then when you actually do punch hard, it's going to be harder to close it. It's already sometimes hard to close it in the glove. Now you're just making it harder, right? And you don't need protection on the inside of your palm. All right, so that's one thing. Now, however you accomplish that, I have plenty of ways to tell you to do it, but however you find a way to do that, that's awesome. I approve. Then the next thing is when you do go around the wrist, make sure you make a fist when you go around the wrist. Now, why is that? Because when you make a fist when you go around the wrist, it's going to prevent you from getting it too tight and cutting off circulation, because you make that fist to go around that wrist and you do it fairly tight, right? Again, not so tight. You can still cut off circulation with a fist around the wrist, but allows you to get a good firm tension there. And then when you relax, then it's not going to cut it off. Because you ever notice sometimes you'll wrap pretty tight with kind of a loose wrist, and then it just ends up being even tighter when you make a fist sometimes or move it in a certain type of way. So make a fist when you go around the wrist, and then go back around that thumb at least a few times. Even if you don't have thumb problems, you can go a long time without thumb problems if you spar or fight and be fine. But then inevitably, mark my words, you're likely to end into a situation where you're going to jack that thumb up, and now it's hurt, and it can be hurt for months. And I've had guys take it out for months with it, and it happened to me. Like for a while, I got lazy. I used gel wraps when I was boxing, and my wrist started jacking up because it doesn't have real good wrist support, at least the basic old ones that I had, and the thumb as well. And then a end to the hand wrap column is a few different fun things. Some of these things you probably have heard, but hopefully something new out of it, right? Or a reminder, because man, so much of this stuff we forget, don't we? All right, you start to have knuckle problems, right? Inevitable with boxing, it happens all the time, and it happens particularly if you hit freaking hard, and if you hit people freaking hard. Because sometimes when you're hitting people hard, you will hit something that's hard, right? But again, the human body can oftentimes be softer than a bag. Keep that in mind as well. So sometimes you blast in specifically certain types of bags. Certain bags, man, you can blast it super hard, and you're gonna hurt yourself way harder, way more than punching an opponent in most areas of their body. All right, but the knuckles start bothering you. So what are some things you can do in addition to your wrap? Well, you can get a big fat sponge, put that in the wrap, put it over the knuckles, and wrap it into your wrap. Great thing to do, easy, basic solution. I recommend the mop style sponges, real fat yellow ones. You can buy them like in the States and Home Depot and stuff like that. And it's big, so you just cut off into pieces. And I use that a lot of times for some of my pro fighters in the past, as well as some of my amateur fighters. And you put that in the wrap, solves the challenge. And then something else, if you're still having trouble with that, a little tip that I picked up that I really like is you have that sponge and then you cut a hole in the sponge over the problematic knuckle. Because oftentimes it's like it's a knuckle that's bothering you. It's not like all the knuckles. So it's a knuckle that's bothering you. And you cut a hole where that knuckle would be on the sponge. So therefore, what does that do? It actually puts pressure now on all the other knuckles and not on that knuckle if the sponge is fat enough. And you keep it in place. But it's made a world difference. Try it out if you haven't tried it out, if you are unfortunate enough to be having knuckle problems. Now, we can also talk about utilizing tape, of course, right? So regular hand wrap tape, whatever it is, inch, I think, wide. The standard tape that you buy at Tidal anywhere else. Put it around to secure your wrist, make a fist go around the wrist, put it around to secure the thumb. Now, how I recommend doing it, because if you put tape straight on your wrist, I have hairy arms. It's going to rip my hair off every time. It's going to be a hassle. So do your wrap as normal, but then put the tape over it. And that's really nice because that's actually how you would do it if you're a pro fighter, or if you want to be that in the future. You don't put tape right on the skin. You put the gauze on first and then you put the tape over. So you can do the same thing with your training wraps. And you can create almost like a cast with that. Just with that alone, it can be very helpful to support that wrist if you're having wrist troubles and things like that. Also, obviously look at your punch technique. Also look at making sure you're squeezing very tight when you hit. You're not squeezing before, but you're squeezing very tight when you hit, because like I talked about in my last video, mass times acceleration, that's a lot of force that you're putting on the hand. And the hand, believe it or not, is not made to hit. It's made to grab. It's made to swat at things, slap things, but it's actually not, at least from my understanding, physiologically made to punch. That's kind of something that humans have largely created, from my understanding. All right? Now, two more things before we move on to the next topic. Let me tell you a little trick from Bodak, right? From freaking decades ago, he would do this, all right? So someone's having, typically your right hand is going to be out or your rear hand, this most people's strong hand, is going to be the hand that's going to cause problems. Now, as any good boxing coach will tell you, you probably want to keep that rear hand straight, meaning you want to probably throw more straight shots with that rear hand. You don't need to be worrying about rear hooks or if you're orthodox, right hooks, because of all the reasons. I'm not going to get into it right now. So what he would do is take a lightweight foam material. Think about the foam insulation that you have. And he would put that over someone's hand, right? Cut it to about the size of a hand. Put it over the top of the hand and over the top of the wrist. Then tie it down with string. Now you tie it down with string, then you take duct tape and go over it to basically have that duct tape form it into a cast. So now it's a lightweight cast, to be clear. It's not a heavy cast. It's not a plaster of Paris cast like you get at the hospital that you don't need to be hitting people with. But it is a lightweight cast that's going to keep that wrist in alignment, all right? And it's going to take the force, and he would actually have it go over the knuckles as well, okay? So you have that piece of foam go from all the way from the top of the wrist and a little bit over, behind the wrist, all the way out to cover the knuckles as well. So therefore, when force hits the knuckles, it's going to transfer that all through and over, and in essence, past the wrist instead of through the entire hand. All right? So again, like I said, duct tape it up so it would form it into a cast and then cut it off, but then cut it off of the person, and you can keep it in that shape so it's a perfect shape that you can now put on your hand and put your wrap over, and it's going to transfer some of that force. Hope that makes sense to you. Then the last thing is just do pro wraps when you train. All right? So it doesn't mean you do what I know you may think I'm saying you do, where you do a pro wrap every time you train. It's expensive, but that's also time intensive. All right? Unless you're top pro fighter watching this, you probably don't have the money or the time to do that. So what you're going to do is you're going to get your gauze and your tape. You're going to make a good pro wrap on your hand. Have your coach do it. You do it, whatever. Learn how to do it. Some great videos on how to do it. Get it done. Then once you got it done, then you cut it off very carefully at the wrist and then peel it off. And you just got to make sure you don't goof it up as you get it off. And then once you get it off, you can kind of put some extra little bit of tape around different sides of it to keep it from fraying out. But then from there, you have your pro wrap that you can then just slide your fingers through the holes and your thumb through the thumb hole, and then make a fist and put a fresh thing of tape around the wrist every time, and you're good to go. And you got your pro wrap. Had plenty of guys do that. Seen plenty of guys do that as well. Great thing you can do. All right, that checks off wraps. Hopefully we got all that covered. Oh yeah, one last thing I want to say on wraps. You know, I always got something a little bit extra. And after the videos, I'm always like, man, I missed this one point. But when you're wrapping, I see so many rookies do this, so watch out. Again, putting pad on the knuckle, very important, right? However you wrap, make sure you build up the wrap of some type, or have something to be built up on the knuckles, so there's more on the knuckles. Now, what I see so many people do is they'll put the knuckle, what's supposed to be protecting the knuckle, more on top of the hand instead of actually over the knuckles and the top of the fingers, or rather the bottom, the base of the fingers, all right? So imagine that in your mind. I'm talking about, if you're listening to this in audio, you got the wrap or the knuckle protection. If you have it too far towards the wrist and just on the top of the hand, then when you make a fist and you hit, your knuckles are, if that wrap moves at all just a little bit back, it's going to slide back over and your knuckles are not protected anymore. So make sure, if anything, I lean when I wrap people up to have that pad that's for the knuckles a little bit further down, a little bit to the tip of the finger, like not all the way there at all, but getting closer to that middle joint of the finger, so that therefore when it's all wrapped down, you have all of that in the front of the fist versus on the top of the hand. Okay, a little nuance there, but it could be a game changer for somebody listening. Now, let's talk about putting on your gloves. I know what you're saying, Coach Keith. Like, what? You say, man, Coach Keith, what the hell? Put on the gloves. Like, you say I don't know how to put on gloves. You put it in there and you strap it. What you talking about? Well, let's talk about it. First off, all right, so as anyone knows who watches my stuff, and anyone that's trained with me over the years, I'm big on being able to open that hand up, right? When you're doing defense, things like that, being able to open up your hand up when you box, and this is going to help you be able to do that. It's also going to help just because you get in a hard sparring session, hard training session, whatever, hard fight, and that glove is kind of sliding on you. It sucks. It sucks. At least I think it sucks. And to me, it actually hurts performance because one is like your mind's thinking about it, which you could be less neurotic and not think about it. But it's also, I notice I get a little bit more tense with my hand because I'm trying to hold that glove on. Versus if I feel secure that glove isn't going to slide up or off, or just a little bit enough so it's uncomfortable now and feels goofy when I hit with it, I'm going to be good. I can relax easily. So how do we do this? What you do is you have your training partner or your coach hold that glove for you when you put it on. So they hold the single glove on both sides of it, near the top of the base of the glove, and they hold it down kind of at their waist, and you push down as hard as you can all the way down so your fingers are now all the way to the tip of where the fingers are supposed to be in the glove, right? As far as they can be. You're pressing those fingers up against the side, and you're pressing the thumb up as well. Everything goes in there as deep as you possibly can. Now, you don't stop there. You go as deep as you can. You're going down to the floor because your coach is holding it for you. Push all the way down to the floor. Now you're on you're all the way deep in that glove, right? And the coach is holding it tight for you. Now, you make a tight fist. Bam! Because that's going to lock it all in place where you want it to be. Now, you strap it, right? So if you're a pro fighter, you got the lace-ups. You lace it up and you put the tape on it, right? Or if you're in sparring and you have lace-ups, same thing. If you just have the Velcro, you put the Velcro on, and you do it as tight as you can. You make sure you get the pieces together close and you wrench that thing around as tight as you can, and man, you're going to feel a load of difference. Next time you train, do this, and man, you're going to be like, Coach Keith, thank you. It feels so good, right? You can just be totally loose with the hands and squeezing tight at the end, but have total relaxation. You don't feel like your gloves are going to be flying off or sliding up on you, right? Because when you get sweaty too, they start sliding up. And again, though, that's a big thing of having more wrap. The more wrap you have, not only you're gonna hit a little bit harder with your glove, because really a good wrap is actually creating like a weapon, right? Within the rules of boxing, but it's like creating a weapon. But also it's going to help secure that glove better. Versus if I just slide my hand in a 16-ounce glove right now, depending what type of glove it is, man, my hand is going to slide around. It's going to slide up a little bit, and it's going to be trouble for me. Now, let's talk about the next thing to do though as well. Like let's say if you're sparring or even training, it's great, particularly sparring, to put some tape over that. Right, whether it's lace up or the Velcro, put tape over that. Why? Right. So one is it's going to be a tighter fit, so now it's going to hold itself better. Two is though, you're going to not, and this is actually something nice for your partner that you're going against, but now you're not going to be scratching them with your Velcro or having the possibility of accidentally lacing them. Now, how often have I seen anything like a lace thing actually happen? Not very often. One is like, it was something that old school fighters would do specifically on people because they would actually not tape the entire lace portion of the glove. Nowadays, in all the pro fights, you have to tape the entire lace portion of the glove. So it is impossible to lace somebody nowadays in an actual pro fight. But I have seen the Velcro scratch the hell out of people. So it's a good idea to tape up that Velcro as well, particularly if you're hard sparring and you're a fighter or you're doing against a fighter and you don't want to actually, cause any just extra damage that's not needed. Okay, so the last thing I want to talk about with gloves is to use different sizes of gloves. When you spar, obviously, stick to 16s, maybe 18s if you're really huge, if you're super heavyweight. But the 16s in the 14 range, but then also doing some training with 12s and 10s, right? Depending on what size you are, you're going to fight in 10s and 12s. And then if you're a pro and you're under 154, you're going to be fighting in 8 ounce. So have a pair of 8 ounce that you get used to as well. That's actually 8 ounce glove. It's not like a kid size glove. It's that weight, but it's adult size. And I notice it's really good to help people just get the feel for it. Because remember, if you want to be a competitive fighter, you have to get used to everything in that environment of competition. So if you are always training with 16s and everything you do is 16s, and then you fight and it's always 10s, and that's the only time you experience 10s, as far as throwing punches and things like that, it's not as specific as it could be, right? Versus using just about the same exact stuff they're going to be using. That's going to be a kind of a theme throughout a lot of this video when I talk about the equipment and the basics. So use all different types of gloves. And one thing I recommend is to perhaps try with even a workout to mix up, within one workout to mix up the ounces of gloves you use, right? So start off shadowboxing no gloves, then maybe jump to the next weight of glove you're going to use, like a 10 ounce, then a 14, then end with a 16 type of thing. Or you can even do the opposite of it, right? And also the week of your fight, that would be a great time, outside of sparring, of course, but to drop down to what weight you're going to be using. And again, don't be overly neurotic with this or anything. It's not going to be like make or break and this is going to make you win or lose. But it's just a good thing to strap on some 10 ounce gloves, do shadow boxing with those gloves the week of your fight, hit the bag a little bit, hit mitts and things like that. And of course, be careful, be safe, but it's going to help prime you for that feel. Okay? Particularly if you can get a pair of fight gloves, right? So if you're amateur, get some like Sting gloves or Onward gloves that are the actual competition size. Or if you're a pro fighter, get pro big competition lace-up gloves, 8 ounce or 10. Right. So now going on to the next one, let's talk about cups, right? Because talking about doing or using what you're going to be competing with, or what is the sport of boxing, right? It's kind of like in any sport, I'm trying to think of a good example, but it's like practicing hockey without a hockey stick, right? Practicing baseball without a baseball bat or a catcher's mitt, right? You need to be using the equipment. And I know like the cup itself, right, is not, it's like not a thing you actually use, but it's on you and it can, you feel it, right? And I mean, I don't know if it's just me, but I know at least some of my other guys I've talked to about this. Depending on how the cup feels, it feels hindering sometimes, right? To like kind of like your hip movement and your waist movement and things like that. So get used to it. If you want to spar and be better at sparring, train in a cup. And if you want to fight, train in a cup. Get used to it, because you need to be so used to everything that is part of your competition and your goal of being a boxer or a better boxer. You need to get so used to that stuff that you should not even notice it's on. Versus, I know the mistakes that I've made is I'd be like, yeah, cups, they look kind of weird. So I don't want to wear a cup while I like train or hit the mitts or whatever, or shadow box. And so therefore the cup and the helmet would only come on when I'm sparring. And so therefore I'm like, I hate this helmet. I'm so not used to it. It sucks. And I just complain about it instead of get used to it. Same thing goes with the cup. All right, so get used to it, because you have to wear it in competition as an amateur, the cup, and pros, and the helmet as well. And we'll talk about the helmet in a second here, all right? So let's talk about big cup versus small cup. So at the end of the day, like we know, you need something, if you're a male, to protect your stuff down there, right? So you can basically just use a jock strap for like amateur competition and things like that. And I've had plenty of guys get away with it completely fine. All right, so I'm not going to tell you some lie that, oh man, if you just wear a jock strap, it's gonna be no good. But if you go pro, I definitely recommend don't, because the gloves are smaller and the wraps are bigger, meaning that the punches can be a lot harder. So therefore, not that I'm worried about that affecting your groin area, but I'm talking about the other places, right? Where an actual boxing cup makes a difference. The boxing cup itself has padding around the hip, at least a good one does. Has some padding around that hip, because if someone hits your hip very, very hard with a good wrap on and in a smaller glove, it's gonna freeze that hip up a little bit. It can damage it if they hit hard, and you'll wish that you had that cup there. All right. So I would largely recommend getting as much of a waistline on that cup as you can that goes up to your belly button, which is about where the waistline is drawn in boxing, and that's gonna help a lot, because if they hit you a little bit below the belt, whether it's like below the stomach area or on the hip, you have that protection, and it can pay off a lot. And even in like a hard sparring session, you'll have guys that are hitting borderline all the time, and you'll wish in those situations that you'd listen to me on this one. But the downside is that it does feel a little bit, when you're not used to it, like it inhibits your torso mobility, right? You feel like you kind of lean on one way, leaning out, moving the waist around. It feels like it gets in the way. So you got to get used to it, all right? But I think the benefits outweigh any type of discomfort you might feel from not being used to it. So train with it. All right, let's move on to helmets. So this is a great topic, the helmet. With a helmet, let's talk about first why we wear a helmet. All right, and it's not so you don't get knocked the hell out. That is just something that is continually espoused by people that know a lot about boxing. All right. So I'm not trying to say like I know more about boxing than some of these people that espouse differently, right? There's a lot of people with a lot more accolades than I have that say, hey, you should wear a helmet because it's going to make sure that you don't get knocked out or hurt. But I just got to say it. From what I was taught and from what I've experienced, from me boxing and having boxers, me personally, I've never gotten hurt when I didn't wear a helmet and sparred. Yes, did some crazy stuff where quote unquote crazy stuff where I didn't wear a helmet and would spar. And also some fighters that I worked with would sometimes not wear a helmet when they sparred, and they wouldn't get hurt, meaning they wouldn't get buzzed more, they wouldn't get dropped more or anything. All right? If anything, I felt like it happened less. And I had neck trouble when I boxed, and that's what ended up making me having to stop boxing in 2010. But with that extra weight on the head and the way that it can kind of catch punches, because it's a fat thing over your head, versus if you have a haircut like this and you're sweaty, stuff just slides off a lot of times. You can feel like you get more tore up wearing a helmet than not wearing a helmet. All right, so let's talk about the why you're going to wear a helmet. Well, number one is, if you're amateur, you're going to have to fight in a helmet. So shut up and get used to it, right? We're not going to change USA Boxing or anything else like that, or AIBA. So get used to the helmet. Train with it. The reason why you don't like it is because you're not used to it. Hit the bag with it. Shadow box with it. Wear it all the time. Make it a part of your attire. It's just like the person, you complaining about a helmet or complaining about your cup, is just like the ridiculous person that would be complaining about the glove on them. You know what I mean? They're like, oh, they come into the boxing gym to train boxing or whatever. Like, yeah, I want to be a boxer. And you're okay, here, let's put on the gloves. They're like, nah, man, the gloves don't feel good. I don't like how gloves feel. Can I just practice without gloves all the time? You'd be like, no, dude, you gotta get used to the glove. So it's just as ridiculous. Helmets are good for stopping cuts and headbutts. That's what they're good for. Like I said, I've never gotten hurt wearing a helmet, or not wearing a helmet, excuse me. And I have gotten hurt wearing a helmet. I'm not saying it was the helmet's fault, but I'm just saying it didn't help in that situation. And I've knocked out plenty of people with a helmet on. Just, that's it. You hit them in the button, and the helmet doesn't make a difference at all, because the helmet isn't covering, like, it's not some weird, like one of those weird martial arts, almost like football helmet style things, right? Where it's like all like plexiglass all over their face or whatever. That's honestly hard to hit if you were to hit it. So, and also as well, I know that a lot of people, they're like, oh, I have a helmet on, so I'm good. I can take shots, right? That's another misnomer as well. with helmets. Just because you're wearing a helmet, again, like I'm saying, doesn't mean you can take shots any better. If anything, sometimes shots can bother you more. Also, if you're sparring a lot in a day and it's getting super sweaty, or you're borrowing someone else's helmet that got super sweaty, that's a lot of extra weight on your neck to jerk your head around, and could theoretically jerk your brain around as well. But it is going to stop the head clashes, because head clashes can happen where a forehead runs into somebody's freaking soft tissues of their face, or foreheads run into foreheads. And that's very painful, and you will have wished you wore a helmet in that situation. Absolutely. Then also as well, the helmet's protection around the eyes is going to minimize the likelihood of getting cut. I've seen people get cut wearing a helmet, but it definitely does cut down on it. And that the original reason why helmets came around was not for any other reason than to keep fighters safe for their fights. Not safe in the way of concussions, but safe in the way of cuts and headbutts and cauliflower ears, right? Those three ways. Because I did have one fighter that he would get hit on the ears a lot, pro fighter, and it would get, he had the swell up and whatnot and fluid buildup and things like that. All right? So cuts, headbutts, and cauliflower ears. But, man, unless you're getting hit a lot like this guy was, or like this guy liked to get hit a lot, and I tried to do my best to help him not, but he sometimes wouldn't listen, then you're not going to have the cauliflower ear too much. But still, all important stuff. Because wrestling and stuff like that, you get it more because you're literally pressed up against a person all the time. All right, so let's talk about the different types of helmets. So right now we talk about why. Let's talk about open versus closed versus handlebar helmets, right? Three types of main helmets out there. So you have the open face, my favorite, and that's become more common, I'm happy to say now. Because initially when those helmets came out, and for many years, the cheek guard was like a super commonplace thing, and me personally, I just didn't like that at all. All right, and I know some people that use it and they're totally happy with it. Okay, so don't let me sway you from liking cheek guards. Just didn't like it. I think it could definitely lead to a little bit more protection of around the eye area. So that's a possible benefit. All right, but I love the open face because again, it's accomplishing the job of protecting the forehead to minimize on clashes of heads, and it protects a little bit around this area, which is the main area you need to watch out for with cuts, right? If there's a cut under the eye, it's not a big deal because that blood is going to bleed below the eye. Remember, cut is only mainly a problem in boxing if it's above the eye and it's interfering with vision of that eye. Now, let's talk about handlebar headgear, which I mean is the bar that goes across the nose. I know there's a lot of fighters that like this, and that's fine that they like it. I really don't like it. I freaking hate it. Now, why do I hate it? Because for a few reasons. One is, have you ever picked up a handlebar headgear? At least the ones I've picked up are heavier than like a Sting headgear, right? Or like a regular amateur competition headgear or just regular training headgear, right? So they're heavier, they're more weight. And again, that's more just, I have a lot of bone spurring in my neck from boxing. And I'm not saying everyone is going to get bone spurring in their neck from boxing, but it's just, I know people I've had people jack their neck up as well. And the helmet does not help that situation when it's big and heavy and bulky. All right. So that's one thing. Yes, that bar across the nose, I definitely have seen it play a role in protecting the nose if you're having trouble with it. Remember, the main reason that helmet came about was not any other reason than you had fighters that had a nose that was susceptible to getting damaged and broken, maybe been broken in the past and things like that, and they had trouble. That's why those helmets came about. So unless you're that guy, don't wear that helmet. It's not like, oh man, I'm gonna be smart, and since I know I get hit a lot when I box and when I spar, I'm gonna wear handlebar headgear and I'll be better off. No, just you need to increase your defense. You need to get better at the sport of boxing and your skills, not make up for it with your equipment. It's like get better at riding the bicycle instead of trying to add more equipment and more padding to you so that when you fall off the bike, you don't get hurt as much. It's like, yes, you want to wear a helmet when you ride a bike, but you don't need to wrap yourself in a whole bunch of foam because you continually refuse to get better at riding the bike and not being such an idiot when it comes to riding. All right. And the one thing I do want to say before I move on about the handlebar headgear thing, as you can tell, I'm just passionate about hating on it, is that I've actually seen someone get their nose broken with a handlebar headgear. I've had someone in the gym that would always wear the handlebar, and they got their nose plastered across their face with the handlebar on. It was on. They still got their nose plastered across their face. All right, now maybe that was a freak situation. Maybe I willed it to happen, but I swear that happened. And so that kind of just was my little nail in the coffin of like, okay, well, there we go. From my own personal experience, I've seen it not even fully do the job that people say it's supposed to do. Adjusting the helmet. I see a lot of guys struggle with this. And they'll be boxing for a long time and struggle with this. But particularly your first couple of years of boxing is where you need to know this stuff. Because I know I went a little while not knowing this, and gosh, it made me hate helmets more. So I'm trying to make you not just completely hate every part of boxing and not do it because of some of these things like helmets and whatnot. All right, so let's talk about adjusting that helmet. Obviously, we all know we have a chin strap on the helmet, right? So I don't need to tell you that. Now you have the back and you have the top of the helmet, right? Both the back and the top are just as important as that chin strap. So everyone's always trying to tighten up that chin strap to adjust it. But if you've been boxing for any period of time, if the top and the back are not adjusted properly, particularly the top, and you would keep on adjusting the chin strap, sometimes that can make it dig further into your throat and things like that, all right? And if you don't adjust things like the top and the back, but also the top a lot, right? So you either have a Velcro apparatus on the top that allows you to tighten it up, that pulls it more up there, or it's rope, like a shoestring that goes around that you tie up tight and pulls the helmet up. It's going to be going over your eyes more. And this is one of the top things that I hate about helmets and hated about helmets when I boxed. But that helmet would be sliding down over your eyes, and you have to keep on trying to knock it up, right? Or you start picking your head up to try to see through it because you can barely see. And also, you go against certain fighters. I've seen this plenty of times. They'll reach out, boom, go pop your helmet down for you, right? Good slick fighter will reach out on their jab and grab the top of your helmet and just knock it down a little bit, put it over your eyes if it moves at all. All right, so you don't want a loose helmet. You want to get it as tight as you can without freaking giving you a horrible headache. But you want to tighten up that top as much as you can so it pulls it up so that your eyes have some ability to see with the chin down. Because if you don't do that, you won't. And then it will move around less as well. And then the back as well helps with that, to pull it back and to keep it in place. And then that chin strap is the last thing that really functions, helps keep the jaw a little bit more supported, definitely. But it functions to just keep that sucker on your head so if someone hits you, it doesn't fly off. All right? But so making sure we're adjusting those things. Again, last thing on helmets, get used to it, train with it all the time, and you'll stop complaining about it so much. And just accept the fact, if you want to be a boxer, you're going to be wearing a helmet. Even if you're a pro fighter, wear a helmet while you spar, because the last thing you want to do is get cut in sparring, and then that's going to derail your fight coming up. Mouthpieces. Let's talk about the mouthpiece. Again, super basic, right? But we're getting into all the nuances. Let's talk about single versus double mouthpiece. Now, I have strong feelings on this. The single versus the double. Unless you have braces, go for that single all the time. Why do I say that? I remember reading somewhere there was some research or data analysis that backed this up, but I don't have it at hand and I can't quote it this time. It makes sense, though, that the double is making the mouth a little bit more open than a single, right? A single, you can get closer to the anatomical position where you can have the mouth completely closed down, right? The more layers you put in there, like you would have with a double, the mouth's a little bit slightly more open even when you're biting down on the mouthpiece. And like we know, anything that's bigger is going to have less or more, goes across more space, is going to be less stable than if it's super tight and compact together, right? So the less compact it is together, the more unstable it's going to be. And from my understanding, you get a higher likelihood of TMJ, where you have problems with the jaw and everything else and pain. They can actually lead you to stop boxing. I had one fighter that had to retire because of TMJ. And because sometimes it just happens. But you don't want to put yourself in a situation to do that. So unless you have braces, where again the braces are going to be cutting into your lips so much that you do have to have a double to cover up both. Single, 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 single. Now, because again, as far as I'm concerned, and as far as my understanding, like I said, of some things that I read years ago, the double is actually more dangerous. It's not actually more safe, and it's harder to breathe with. All right, molding it and boiling it, right? So obviously, like we know, there's plenty of brands out there nowadays, like Impact mouth guards, that you can get the dental grade molding to your teeth, and that is great, right? That used to be something back in the day, like my dad would talk about, that you would have to go to a dentist to get that done. Now you can get it done for very cheap through those different companies. Impact is a great company, and it's molded. So they create the mold, you send the mold in, they send you back your mouthpiece. And that mouthpiece, you actually have to pull it off because it's sucked onto your top teeth. And that's great, because then if you get hit and stuff like that, it's far less likely to fall out. I don't know if it's hard to say ever or never, but I don't know if I've ever seen one of those molded mouthpieces knocked out. I mean, I'm sure I have, but I just can't think of any. But I've definitely seen just the cheap ones that people mold themselves. Now, when you get a cheap one and you mold it yourself, right? Like in our beginner boxing pack at our facilities, you get a basic mouthpiece, right? Single mouthpiece. And you boil it and you mold it. Now, let me talk about that real quick. Couple tips is don't only just boil it and then mold it, but when you're molding it, try to make that dental grade form, meaning like press it up against your gums and really get your fingers in your mouth and just mold that thing, sculpt it to your teeth and to your gums so it fits very, 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 very tight. You'll get some good use out of the cheap basic mouth guards like that. Think about it as well that if you're having any trouble with cut gums with your mouthpiece, it's probably because it's not molded all the way. And if you're gagging, sometimes it happens, it goes too far back, cut the backs off, because that's just different things I've seen people struggle with, particularly newer people with boxing. So there's a little tip for complete newbies. Now, moving on to a few finishing things, all right? I saved the best, or one of the best things, for last. Very important. Very, very, very important, and fairly underused. And I have to say that I've been guilty of underusing this from time to time. I would say that when my father was still with us, that he was very good at using this. And so take the words of wisdom from someone that did it for like 5 decades, right? Vaseline. Vaseline. Massive. Petroleum jelly is the generic name for Vaseline. But Vaseline, very, 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 very important. All right, let's talk about all the ways it's important. And it's not just important to put over a cut or whatever, right? Whatever one reason is you might think it is, right? Or maybe you know all the reasons, right? And that's awesome, you do. So it stops cuts. You probably know that, right? So you put Vaseline, but for those that don't, right, you put Vaseline for an amateur fight, for sparring, and particularly for pro fights, over the eyes, around the cheeks, and really over the entire face. Because one is you want to stop cuts, because a cut is caused by a punch causing friction and scraping, and the Vaseline makes it slippery, and it's less likely to happen. And you want to reapply that as a pro fighter, after, in between every round of your fight to get that advantage. But also you want it across the entire face, because it's going to, bring me to my second thing, it's going to help shots slide, right? So think about someone who's a slippery fighter, right? Someone that's hard to hit. If you can put as much Vaseline all over you that you can make yourself slippery, you're going to have a good time, right? If you're just freaking like grease, punches don't stick to you, they just slide off of you. That's a good place to be as a fighter. And you literally can make situations like that happen. Now, it can also help you cut down on nosebleeds, because I've had fighters that they're nosebleeds, right? It happens. And if you put some Vaseline up the nose and just swish it around a little bit, both nostrils, it helps to stop the blood from coming out. All right? So it's a good thing. And because an amateur fight, at the very least, can be stopped by a nosebleed. And for a pro fight in a corner, I've been a professional cut man. And using things like adrenaline is very important to cause the blood to coagulate. But if you don't have access to that, because apparently that's really expensive now, using some Vaseline is a good, easy way to do it, as well as with cold Vaseline as well, by the way. Big tip there, the hotter the Vaseline is, the more it's going to be like oil, and it's going to be hard to like get chunks of it that you can then spread around the face and whatnot and do things with. And the colder it is, then it's going to help, because cold is going to make things contract, right, like blood vessels. So that's good as far as cuts are concerned. But then also it helps contract the Vaseline a little bit, or the petroleum jelly. So now it's a little bit easier to get a hold of and use. Talking about the slippery thing. Let's talk about, in my opinion, everywhere I want to have petroleum jelly Vaseline when I spar, or when I did spar. And with my guys, man, I want it all over that helmet. I want that thing completely lubed up. All over the helmet, all over the face. Because, man, like I said earlier, that helmet is annoying because shots can stick to the helmet, grab. Because think about it, if you have like a haircut like me, or whatever, just sweat, and you have regular hair, and a shot catches you like right on the side, it slides really easily. But if you have this helmet, it's that little bit extra that comes out, and it can catch. But if you can Vaseline it up a lot, it slides. And I've had guys be so much safer in sparring, meaning less rocking shots, less concussions, Vaselining themselves up. Because if I can't stick a punch, I'm not saying a punch isn't going to stick on you ever, but the more you can make punches that have any ability to slide off your headgear and slide off your face, the better it is to avoid concussions. So I just can't drum that point home enough. Vaseline the hell out of everything. And if you're in a situation, it's good to spar with people and take care of people. Put Vaseline on both gloves. But even putting Vaseline on the tips of both gloves after every round, I would still Vaseline the hell out of that helmet and the face. Also, it's going to minimize the likelihood of getting your nose broken too, because again, the whole stuff about sticking. Also, keep that darn chin down, and you'll diminish that likelihood as well. If you keep your chin down, about the only way you can get that nose broken is with an uppercut. All right, so that's one punch versus at least 2 other punches that could do it. Now, a couple tricks. Now, I'm not saying you should do this, but I just want to tell you some tricks so you can be aware of these tricks. One thing is to put a little Vaseline on the arms, because if you're in a situation where you're going against someone that is going to tie you up a bunch or try to tie you up, put some Vaseline on your arms. Not only on your arms, but under your arms. You could just do under the arms. Why is that? Because every time they reach out under your arms, try to do underhooks or whatever on you, you're going to be supplying them with Vaseline. That's going to do a couple things. One, it's going to be easy for you to break out of holds. 2 is it could actually get on the glove and Vaseline up the opponent's or the other person's glove. And you could do this in a fight. I'm not saying you should, but these are just some things to consider and think about. Some things that I've heard about. Last thing on this note, before I hit my final thoughts to wrap up, is cocoa butter, right? Now, I'm not going to say just use cocoa butter and do the same as I think Vaseline does. What I'm saying is there's a thought out there, and it seems legitimate, and it was talked to me by my father and whatnot, so I feel like there's a lot of legitimacy to it. But if someone tends to cut a lot, to essentially condition their skin with cocoa butter, right? So get that cocoa butter, get it all over the face, and almost, I don't know much about beauty stuff, but just really just get it in there, into the pores and everything else. And that does seem to help with someone who is prone to cutting to be less likely to cut. Because you have some guys that their skin is just kind of thin, they have the high cheekbones and things like that, and those guys sometimes just cut and they can't help themselves. Also, too, cutting weight. If you're dehydrating yourself a lot and overly dehydrating yourself, I think you're putting yourself in more position to cut. So that's another disadvantage to that. All right? Now, actually, I think that's going to be in some of my wrap-up points here real quick, because now it's time for wrap-up points. All right. So I didn't talk about shoes. Shoes is not something that I have a big opinion about, because a lot of people have different preferences with shoes. Just following all the parameters that and you can look up online for a basic boxing shoe and what you should have, all right? Flat-soled shoes, etc., ankle support, etc. I don't have any big opinions on that. Now, 2 last points of what not to do. First one is avoid training in a sauna suit. Now, I'm saying training in a sauna suit. I don't mean sauna suits completely. There's a time and a place. The time and the place is you have to cut some water weight fast to get on a scale and hit a number. This is not training, all right? So I know this whole video is about training and your equipment and the basics. But part of your basic equipment in the gym should not be training in a sauna suit, because there's a couple things you're doing there. One is obviously, you're dehydrating yourself, okay? And so you're going to cause strain on your organs for no good flipping reason. And you might be training in a standard boxing gym that doesn't have AC or anything else, and it's the summertime, and you're sweating your freaking everything out. And you're not only losing water, you're losing electrolytes, magnesium, potassium, sodium. And if you're not adequately replacing those things, then you can run into a big problem. I had a problem when I was in Mexico where I was drinking so much water, I literally diluted my sodium stores in my body, and it caused massive problems for me that I had to take salt tablets for a period of time to get my sodium levels back to normal, and that took a while. And it really hurt my training. So I don't want the same thing to happen to you, and I've seen it happen to not only me, but other people. So that's one thing. And then the second thing with the dehydration thing that you might not be thinking about. So you got the electrolytes and the trace minerals that you're diluting, water in general, but the most important place, or one of the most important places where there's water, is inside your own skull. And if you're diminishing that cerebral fluid that is there as a cushion for your skull, and you're sparring and things like that and getting hit, or even just jumping rope and jarring it all the time, you are increasing the likelihood of damage to the brain. No, let's keep the brain healthy. Boxing is a dangerous enough sport as it is. Let's not make it more dangerous than it has to be, and to no benefit. Also, as well, when you're training with that sauna suit on and training in just crazy hot environments, again, there's a time and a place, right? You're going to be fighting in a freaking hot gym and stuff like that. You got to get used to that. But if you're always training with that sauna suit on, if you're always training in just extremely hot environments, overly hot environments, there is a deconditioning effect that I've seen happen where the heart rate is more likely to shoot up, and you're going to actually decondition yourself sometimes because it's just a little bit too taxing on the body, versus being in shape, being able to be exposed to a few different temperatures when you train. And then if you have to compete in a hot temperature, that's okay. But if you're consistently training, day after day, in a sauna suit, in hot temperatures, there can be a deconditioning effect. And I've seen that happen and play out. Now, if you do want to cut water, obviously a few things to consider. This video is not about that, but I just want to mention it, is every good cutter nowadays, whether they're a wrestler, MMA, boxer, anyone that's smart, not just doing some old school crap that they heard their brother do or whatever, they load up on water crazy hard. They don't diminish water the week of the fight. They load up hard on their water. Gallon, more. They load up hard, but they do that for only a period of time. They don't do it like I did, where I was drinking a crap ton for months, which is what caused me to dilute my electrolytes. You load up on the water because it's going to be easier to get it off you. Then, before you weigh in, whether it's the night before or even the morning of, you sweat. You get in that sauna suit and you sweat yourself, and I recommend not cutting more than a small percentage of your body weight with water, but cut off that last few pounds or whatever, and bam, you're there. It's going to come off easy. You sweat, but make sure when you put on the sauna suit, you don't sit there, you move. Because if you get moving, you'll sweat. If you just sit, you won't sweat, all right? And in my opinion, be a good enough fighter that you don't have to cut a lot of weight so you can try to beat up on smaller people. So if you're a good fighter, you shouldn't have to try to fight smaller people. Or you can say, oh, well, man, everyone else cut, so I'm just evening the playing field. Well, if you're good enough, you can walk around your fight weight or a couple pounds above and fight the dude that... I've had this happen. I had this happen last year to my one guy that won regionals and went to nationals. The guy he fought tried to cut a bunch of weight to get an advantage. How do you think round 3 ended up? Round 3, the guy was like falling over. Not just from my guy's punches, but from the exhaustion of him cutting the hell out of his weight because he thought he was going to get an advantage. He's a freaking tall, huge guy. And it didn't play out well for him, and probably the same thing wouldn't happen to you either. And you can also think of a lot of examples of this with pro fighters that are known for cutting a bunch of weight and their performance diminishes in their fights. And still, they still won and stuff like that, but they would have been better off. And there's plenty of old school fighters and plenty of current fighters as well that don't cut a bunch of weight and are some of the greatest, arguably. All right? And the last little note before I jump off here is avoid the altitude training mask. That's something that's become less popular. It got really popular there for a period of time. The same concept. It has a deconditioning effect or a detraining effect that when you put that sucker on, yes, you're taxing yourself more, but then your actual output diminishes, right? From what you're doing, what you're conditioning your body for. And so, from my understanding, according to the science and the research, the jury's still out on that thing if that has any benefit, or if just going up to altitude has any benefit, or if it's better to rest at high altitude and train at whatever altitude you're going to be doing your performance at. It's another school of thought as well, because then you're not going to have a deconditioning effect. So a lot of stuff to consider there. Obviously, if you're going to be fighting in altitude, you need to get used to that altitude and train. When I was in Mexico, it was 2,000 feet above sea level. I had to get used to that. But I lived there. I got used to it. When I first got there, I spent 2 weeks not doing anything. The first time I got there, I went right to training hard, and I freaking got sick from training too hard with it, right? So there's a give and a take with this stuff. And let me tell you the last thing to think about with all this stuff, right? Or with anything. A good little test you can use, critical thinking test. And that is, okay, if everyone does it, it probably is effective. It doesn't mean always, but it probably is. So let me give you an example. Steroids, blood doping, right? Increasing the red blood cell count. Fighters do that. It's illegal, but fighters do it. Fighters inject themselves with steroids. It's illegal, but they do it. Why is it such a problem? Why did they have to make it illegal? Because it is such a big advantage. I mean, again, I'm not saying that your skills can't pay the bills and, you know, you can beat these guys that do that in a skilled sport like boxing. It's not as much just based off of sheer strength, right? But the reason is because it works. And so, again, the same thing goes for, like, oxygen, the oxygen deprivation mask and stuff like that. It's like, man, if it was really that much of a game changer effect, right? Or if that goofy supplement that they're trying to sell you at GNC was really that much of a game changer, it would probably be banned. Or just like every single person would be doing it, and the people that don't do it, there'd be an obvious detriment, right? It's like with bodybuilding. People that are not doing drugs in bodybuilding, it's obvious that they're not doing drugs, right? So same thing goes with this as well. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it helped you maybe pick up on some points, or maybe a ton of points, on your basic training equipment. If you have any comments, thoughts, mention something that stood out to you, or something you might have more questions about, or a topic maybe for the next video, make sure you click the like button if you liked it. Click share if you think somebody that you know could benefit from watching it. And if you're not subscribed already, do me a big favor and hit it, because most people that watch this are not, so that'd be really helpful. Appreciate you guys, and watch out for the next video.